Hey fellow Game Masters, welcome back to the Daily D20. I'm Richard Quiner, and today is Fellowship Friday, and it's another special episode, not because I'm shooting with a totally different camera and it's on a selfie stick and gonna be shaky, but also I'm at GaryCon, and I found Kelsey Dionne. How is your last name pronounced?
Oh, that's a good question. It's like Celine Dion, same pronunciation.
Kelsey Dionne, aka the Arcane Library, who I did a video a couple weeks back about the secrets of Skyhorn Lighthouse.
Yes.
I remember it.
Mouthful.
Okay. It is a lot.
It's a long one.
So I was able to track her down, and we're going to have a little chat. Before we get into me asking you a lot of questions, can you tell the people what have you done? What is your, thing when it comes to D&D and role-playing games in general?
Sure. So, I think the biggest thing that I've done is I'm an adventure writer, first and foremost, for 5th edition, and I think I sort of reimagined the adventure presentation style slightly, which was risky, but turned out to be a helpful way to write. I kind of write more abbreviated bullet list style adventures, and it was received well, and I began writing more of them, and here we are today. So that's my current history with the game.
That's your current. So I've only read The Secrets of Skyward Lighthouse, but have you taken that writing style over through the rest of your things? So if I go by one of your other adventures, I should be able to just pick it up and run it in an hour.
Exactly. I use the same format for my other adventures, so every encounter is contained on one page, and you have ways to help you transition out of a scene, and you also have a dramatic question for each scene, so you know what is actually trying to be accomplished here. That's the whole goal.
So if you guys remember, the dramatic question is once that question is answered in Skyhorn Lighthouse, once the question is answered, the scene can move on to the next encounter.
Yes.
Which, for new GMs, I thought that was an excellent idea. You put a period at the end of the encounter, so people can just move on from there.
Yeah.
What made you think of that idea and how to quantify that in your writing?
Yes, so I'm sort of building on the shoulders of giants here because, first of all, a dramatic question is something from screenwriting, which I have not a ton of experience with, but enough, and also some really well-reasoned folks who talk a lot about game philosophy, like the Angry GM, have talked about using a dramatic question, but I'd never really seen anyone explicitly state it in an adventure, what is the goal of the scene and how do you know when it's done? But I myself, when I'm writing my game notes, actually write one down for myself. And so I was like, well, if I'm doing this for every encounter in a published module, why don't I just start writing things that include it already?
Yeah.
You
so
know?
Then that takes the guesswork out of the GMs. When you get a D&D module, you don't have that explicitly stated for each encounter, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you don't often have the writer talking directly to the GM in a module about, here's my purpose when I wrote this, here was the goal of the encounter. You get it sometimes, but surprisingly little. And so I feel like it's really helpful to the DM to know what was the goal behind this encounter. Why did I write it this way? Mm-hmm. That's the whole reason.
Okay. So building on that then, because most people who are probably going to watch this are new into the gaming systems, and with Dungeons & Dragons, their very first starter set, you have the Lost Mines of Phandelver, right? How is it that you look at an encounter and pick out the dramatic question? Is there something you look for in the encounter, or is it whatever your gut is telling you, or do you kind of pick it up on the fly with your players?
I think that you can, when you look at an encounter, you're gonna try to find out, you first jump your mind forward to well, how is this encounter probably gonna end? What's going to mean that the players have won? Is it because they got across the bridge? Is it because they escaped? Is it because they defeated the foes? And once you know how it's supposed to end, that gives you a clue for what the actual goal of the encounter is. So it's not always win the fight, sometimes it's get past the enemy to safety. And so
you have to find whatever method will do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so you'll start to notice that not every encounter in a published adventure is just about a stand-up fight. There are many that are about escaping someone chasing you, or trying to navigate a narrow bridge while goblins are shooting at you. And then once you isolate what it is that you have to do to end the encounter, you actually then know the goal of it and what needs to be accomplished.
That's really good advice. That's a good way to look at the encounters. For me, I don't really do modules too much. I use them as like a baseline, as
Yep.
a starting point, and then usually after the first session, the party goes off the rails, as everyone's
Yes.
experienced at least 20 times, and then you're just homebrewing everything.
Exactly.
So that's a really interesting way to look at it. Of this is your goal for the encounter, and even just making up your own encounters on the fly, you can still have that same process, right? You don't have to have it written out
Yeah.
previously necessarily.
Absolutely true. And it helps you add a little bit of variety to your encounters because you don't always look at things as a straight up combat anymore. You're
Yeah.
like, well, that was my last dramatic question is can the players defeat the orc? So maybe this time they're coming upon a rust monster with a nest of eggs. And it turns out that the dramatic question is can they steal an egg and escape the rust monster? So of course there's still combat, but the real goal of the encounter is for them to steal the egg and run.
Yeah, okay.
And once they've done that, then you know they've ended the encounter.
And then you can move on.
Yes.
And it also avoids kind of lollygagging in the
Yeah.
encounter, because that also is a thing. You know, you do combat, everyone wants to loot all the bodies 20 times to make sure they find something. 'Cause
Just
if
to
they-
make sure.
If they roll a 5 on investigation, they're going to be like, what if I roll higher? I'm going to get something good, when that might not be the case.
Yep.
That's already really good advice right there. We're done here.
Okay, bye. No, just kidding.
Actually, I did want to ask you about your history. How did you get into D&D and role-playing games? What is your history with it? How did you become a dungeon master? How did you become an adventure writer? We want to know the backstory.
Oh gosh, I'll give you the
Your character 2-minute backstory.
for the D&D character of Kelsey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I started playing D&D when I was 12, so that was almost 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I grew up in southern Wisconsin, so I was lucky to be surrounded by the original D&D crowd, like everybody who worked for TSR.
Yeah.
They came to the local game
It's
store.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a combination of my mother being really gently open-minded, like, hey, I work with a librarian whose son likes this game. Why don't you try it? And then I went to the local game store, and I met some just fantastic dungeon masters there who gave us a really fun weekend, and we were like, wow, this game's great, and I've been playing ever since then. So,
Wow.
and getting into writing, I studied writing. I used to be a journalist, and that translated over into writing, and kind of combined my two loves of writing things that relate to D&D into adventure writing. So,
All right. That's a good 2-minute backstory.
oh yeah.
Being a 12-year-old, and it feels kind of like beating a dead horse, because we all know D&D is very inclusive, but at the time of 20 years ago, it was a whole different environment in the U.S. in
Yeah.
general. What was the environment like getting into D&D? You said it sounded like it was very open, accepting.
Yes, it was. It's surprising. You're absolutely right, because I was the only 12-year-old girl at the game store playing. Not for any particular reason. It's not like they were telling little girls they couldn't come in. I just think that I don't know if many little girls were even made aware of D&D as an opportunity. Like I have some friends who are women who love fantasy. They love Lord of the Rings growing up, but they just weren't aware of D&D. So they play now. But I think I am so grateful to the people who taught me how to play and the whole crowd, the Southern Wisconsin D&D group, because there was never a moment where I felt unwelcomed. I think it would be the exact opposite. They were always like, yes, like come play, like we're so happy you're here. And side story, Gary Gygax, I met him in person, and he was the one who told me to become a dungeon master on my birthday. My birthday is over Gen Con. And he gave me my first DM's guide. Like someone told him it was my birthday who worked with him, and was like, there's this little girl. And so he gave me my DM's guide and had signed it and told me to become a DM because I would love it, and to slap my players around like redheaded dwarves. That was the quote. And I was like, all right.
I think that's good DM advice right
It
there.
is.
Slap your players around like redheaded dwarves.
I don't know. I hope yeah.
I feel like there's
He can get away with
something
saying
behind that.
I know, I don't know. He was known for I think he was known for commentary of that nature. And I was 12, so I was like, haha, okay, I didn't know what he meant.
Oh, that happened when you were 12.
Yeah, it was the same year I started
So
playing.
you started playing.
I went to Gen Con in Milwaukee, and he was there, and somebody in his circle who was my DM was like, hey, it's this girl's birthday. And so he literally set aside time to just meet with me one-on-one and encourage me to play D&D. And it was like
Holy cow.
a super special memory.
Wow. So, I did mention, once I get focused again, I did mention in last week's video, I am going to do a video on Gary Gygax and the creation of D&D. But you guys can see, the viewers can see, being here at this convention, everyone has a certain level of respect for what he's done, and it's an interesting environment to be in. Like Matt called it the Mecca. I agree.
Yes.
This is my first year here. It's been awesome. I'll be back probably every other year, even though it's like freezing outside. Now it's raining.
Oof.
It's not great weather.
Nope.
But the environment inside has always been really open and accepting. Have you been doing GaryCon a lot? Like,
This is just my second year.
this is your second year.
Yeah.
So you came last year when you met up with Matt and you guys decided to do Monstrous Lexicon.
Right, that's so funny. We both had met here in person for the first time. We were aware of each other and we were talking. We were kind of friends online. And then we met here. We spent a couple days playing games together because Matt's a fantastic DM and so creative. And by the end of the con, we had this plan for a book that was like, let's make some funny monsters. And then I'm sure that he told the story in the last
Well,
one.
that's
but-
okay.
Yeah, but it turned into a real, actual book of lots of monsters, and so here we are.
And where can people find that now then?
It's on Amazon, actually, right now, and we're probably going to get the PDF up on DriveThruRPG in short order.
Nice.
But you can get like a hardcover or a softcover on Amazon.com just by searching the Monstrous Lexicon.
Monster creation seems to be something that is a strong point for you.
Oh, thank you.
Be only going off of Monstrous Lexicon stuff and what I talked to Matt about, I hadn't really talked to you about that too much. He told me a lot of ideas that you guys were working on and stuff you guys had coming out. But then the Secrets of Skyhorn Lighthouse had this whole race you created. So you didn't just create like a monster. You created a race that had kind of culture to it.
Yeah.
In this little one shot, not even, I guess it would be like 2 adventures probably, or 2 sessions, depends on how the players go.
Yeah.
My players would take like a week or
Okay.
like 5 sessions, and then they would still probably just murder the lighthouse owner and take everything anyways, because
That's an option.
they're
you know?
monsters.
Yeah.
But so you created the eel folk,
Yeah.
and you took that to a place, I thought it was interesting because you did make it a culture. You had certain things, and it's hard for me to remember exactly. You had different kind of caste systems built into the
That's
society.
right. Yeah.
And you had 4 different types of eel folk
Yeah.
that were each different strengths, and you could tell you put in a lot of effort. When you're creating a creature like that, what inspires you to go to that level of detail with your adventure?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. I think the reason that it's so fun to put a ton of effort into the monsters and give them that extra oomph is because that's probably the one thing that is going to be a repeating thing after your adventure ends. So, you write something that's the scope of 1 or 2 sessions, but you can have the monsters that appear and it be like a recurring villain or something that the DM uses over and over again. And so
Yeah.
I think it's worth it to put in the extra effort to make those monsters a viable villain or a recurring problem. And that
Okay.
means you give a few options. You give some weaker and tougher versions. I actually included a version of the monster that isn't even in the adventure that's more of a boss that I was like, well,
Yeah,
Maybe-
I noticed that wasn't there, and I had gone back and looked for it. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's not in there.
that confuses people sometimes.
Yeah.
I was like, that's legit. That's a little bit like, why is this monster here? But it's really because I wanted the monsters themselves to have the option of longevity in the overall campaign that the DM was running.
Okay. Piggybacking onto that, have you ever thought of continuing that and taking the eel folk and making the whole society maybe a player race that someone could pick up on, building a culture in terms of actual society, like a city of eel folk? Have you thought of taking to that extent?
I actually
Yet?
haven't. No, not yet.
Okay,
I could think about that,
You
though.
can pay me for that idea
There you
after
go.
you publish something.
We'll co-write it.
You're welcome.
I know.
All right. Talking about all that, what is your one piece of advice for the new GMs, the people who maybe have only read a chapter or 2 of the DM's Guild, the DM's Guide, something that, first level dungeon master? What would you tell them to help them get their game going and help them feel more comfortable running games?
Yeah, this is a good question. I feel like, and I am always, even after being a DM for like 15-ish years, I still am constantly trying to improve the craft. And one thing that I always go back to is you want to appear confident, right? Like nobody really feels confident sitting down. Like it's a sham. No DM feels confident sitting down in front of people that they're either new with or haven't seen. But if you speak like precisely, if you say what you mean to say once and then go quiet, that gives the players a chance to think and talk to each other and respond. And I think one of the things I see with new DMs most is that they feel the need to fill silence. After they say something, then they re-say it again, or they point additional things out about the room that they already said. So a really good practice to keep your flow at the table healthy and like really masterful seeming is to state what you want to say about the room and then strive to be quiet and listen to the players and let them talk. And they will fill the silence.
And have you found that that's the case? Like even for new players, sometimes if you stop talking, eventually, maybe not in the first hour, but eventually they'll just pick up the silence and run with it. Have you found that to be the case?
It is the case, and especially if you end what you're saying with "What do you do?"
What do you do?
Yes.
There's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like it.
That's solid, simple advice. That took me probably 6 months to figure out.
It's a way to feel
DMing,
to appear graceful even when you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
You look decisive, and that's a hint from. I actually used to be a teacher too. And when you're teaching in front of a class, it's so easy to want to fill the silence. But when people are thinking, you need to not keep talking. So letting silence sit for a few seconds is actually a really good thing to do.
There you go. So, there you go. That's the DM advice from, how long did you say, 15 years?
I've been playing for 20 and DMing for maybe 15 to 18.
15 to 18 years. That's better advice than I can give. I've only been DMing for 2 years.
Well, it means you have a black belt.
Just a black belt. Anyways, so you can find Kelsey all over the internet, relatively. Links will be in the description, but we did talk earlier, you have a website that I didn't know about on my other video. What is your website?
It is thearcanelibrary.com.
There you go. Go check that out. Buy some adventures. She's got, how many you got up there, you think, by now?
6 or 7?
6 or 7.
Yeah.
Are they all varying levels?
Yes.
So someone could potentially buy the adventures and run a whole bunch of campaign, or a full campaign through them all.
I think so. Like
Almost.
up through. I actually have one that's 20th level too, which was fun. So if you want to do like a one shot, like what would it be like to be epic? It's a 20th level one shot.
Which is cool. Not a lot of people, I feel like not a lot of people do that. I haven't played a 20th level anything yet.
It's rare. I've never DM'd one until that adventure. Funnily
So
enough.
that's probably pretty epic.
It was fun. It was a big one.
All right. So check out the website. I will leave the links in the description below. Kelsey, thank you for taking the time to meet up in this weird hallway and doing it on this.
Yeah.
Despite technical difficulties, we made it work out. And now we're going to go play more games because we're still at GaryCon. Check her out. Check out the channel. Subscribe. You guys know what to do. Thank you for watching.